What profession do you find unhealthy? I imagine trucking comes with a lot of problems. My grandfather was a trucker his whole life. He started his own business and raised 3 kids off of trucking. It ate him. Sleep deprivation, sitting still for 10 plus hours at a time, an endless stream of black coffee, and later energy drinks to stay alert, eating nothing but fast food and truck stop fare. And even when he was home, the phone rang non-stop, usually brokers asking him to run another load from VA to CA. And to top it all off, he would be gone for weeks at a time, missing significant chunks of his children's lives. And all of this, just to enjoy retirement for 2 years before dying of total kidney failure. I just turned in my keys a few days ago. I was able to eat healthy thanks to my company providing a fridge, but even though I was able to hit up a Planet Fitness once or twice a week, it didn't make up for the sedentary lifestyle. Can't wait to lose these extra pounds I've gained and take better care of my teeth. The worst thing though is the 14 hours workdays and the 6-day work weeks. It's exhausting and it's impossible to have a life. I'm 44 and a stranger in my own town. Never been married, never had kids, barely have friends. I'm not involved in anything in my community besides seeing my family and going to church. The sacrifice truckers make is overwhelming. Was going to say transportation, logistics, operations. Some places have you work 5-day, 12-hour shifts, then be on call every other weekend. Sure, the paycheck is nice every other week, but when are you really going to have the time to spend it? You can find yourself sitting at your desk going on working 60 hours thinking, I have barely seen my daughter this week. Brutal. You'll get phone calls from drivers, dispatchers calling you at 4 a.m. talking about inclement weather, truck breakdowns. In my experience, some companies do not give about people who are openly racist, homophobic, transphobic, etc. I am looking at you, Total Quality Logistics. Some companies think mental health days are a joke and a sign of weakness. Your shift can be 5 a.m. 5 p.m. and really the only time you stand up is to print off paperwork, refill coffee, water, and or to use the bathroom. This industry can be incredibly abusive mentally and emotionally. I just started trucking and can confirm, I do eat healthy and use a lumbar roll to help with my posture. My body type helps with not gaining weight. If anything, I've lost weight because I'm not eating enough. I also try not to go more than 3-4 hours without getting out and walking around to get some blood flow. I also run when at home twice a week for the legs. I've always enjoyed running. I will never do OTR because 3 weeks without any cardio sounds deadly. It certainly has its challenges, but I feel I am doing a lot right to combat it. My dad was a truck driver for a decade or so. He got moved to the office after a drunk man decided to collide with his tractor. My dad needed 16 staples to the head and the seatbelt saved his life. The other man died. My dad lived with the guilt for a couple weeks thinking he had a man. The man was trying to my dad whilst committing suicide. It was a difficult time for him. Whilst he drove, he ate very unhealthy foods, drank a lot of caffeine, and now has to watch his cholesterol. I'm thankful for the seatbelt that saved his life. Lots of truckers don't have that fortune of making it out of accidents like that. As a child of a long-haul truck driver who retired recently, I agree wholeheartedly. My dad has horrible cardiovascular health made worse by years of caffeine, stress, and sitting in the same position for hours upon hours. He has had PTSD from seeing some awful over the years and just general depression from being by himself so much. They have to park in terrible areas for the night on occasion, so he's been robbed more than once. I remember my mom freaking out on the phone when he called to tell her he got knifed in one of the holdups. The family also gets the bonus of stress. The whole health issue thing is made worse by the fear that they'll go to halfway across the country. The worrying about them getting in an accident thing really blows too. Even a driver with millions of safe miles can have it happen. About 20 years ago, my dad jackknifed his truck hauling wiggle wagons aka double trailers. He managed to push open the driver's side door and climb out of the cab with a couple broken ribs. The phone call was my mom's worst fear realized. Thankfully, he was only a few hours away and still in the state. I know we need them, but I always knew I'd never marry an OTR driver because of my entire childhood. My husband's a truck driver and it's very hard on him, from the crappy gas station foods to the terrible schedule. He works 2 weeks then comes home for 2 days. The amount of times we've had calls where he cries because he feels so lonely and all the other emotions is so heartbreaking. He watches his daughter grow up through pictures and a phone screen, and now that we're expecting another child, it's going to be even worse. There's a lot of sacrifices these drivers make, and most people won't ever understand, but I'm forever thankful for the people that do. Honestly, it depends on the person. My grandfather was a long-haul trucker, managed to keep somewhat of a work-life balance, and had a great relationship with his family. On the other hand, he had a friend who made much more money than him but was always broke, and had children that barely spoke to him. My grandpa managed to go basically his entire career with no accidents. The only injury I remember hearing about from him on the job was that he shattered his arm by falling off of the truck whilst adjusting the racks. My dad has been a trucker for about 80% of my life, and it has taken a toll on him. Growing up, oblivious to the dangers and hardship it creates, I loved going around the lower 48 with him, but now that I'm older and can see what I was blind to as a kid, it's definitely not the best. He got out of trucking for about 6 years, but had to go back. And during those 6 years, I watched him lose a bunch of weight and gain some energy back. Now that he's back into trucking, he's always so tired, complaining about how drivers don't know how to drive around him. He's gaining his weight back too from just sitting all the damn time. He gets up at around 4:30 a.m. to go get his loads for the week, and he's still awake around 11 p.m. some nights, just getting to the truck stop for the night. About the dangers I was talking about one day. He was sitting in the cab of his semi, filling out his logbook in the truck stop parking lot, and all of a sudden another semi plowed into his. They're both perfectly fine. Imagine if he had just tried getting out at that same time. He wouldn't be here anymore. I've also been the passenger of someone who would be very close to semis. Semis can't see at least 200 feet behind them, and there's so many blind spots. So please, 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 drivers, don't be so close to the semis when you're driving near them unless you have no absolute choice. For your safety and others. Here it used to be bad and still is with the wrong work culture, but there are a lot of protections for drivers nowadays, and I'd much rather work my current job as a concrete mixer driver than one as a concrete layer. It's not perfect by any means, there are plenty of problems, but I can tell you with certainty that it's not as bad as a lot of jobs. Long haul is worse than mixer by far, but I'd rather long haul than factory worker, for example. Bad, but not the worst by a long shot. My uncle, who is a trucker, has a habit of leaving his truck unattended for a long period of time while on lunch break and lazy to check the contents of his shipment. 3 months ago, he was detained by customs when passing by the border, and drugs were found on his truck in an unidentified parcel which he never processed. He is now serving 2 years in jail, and his wife is devastated. Our family had to step in and help her financially and emotionally until she is ready to go back to the workforce. Was actually a profession I miss and consider getting back into. I left high school and wound up driving. Did it for about 5 years when I decided to go back to college. I'm now an engineer. I found it really relaxing. Show up, interact with folk for 15 minutes in the yard, jump in your wagon and just switch off. If you find driving relaxing, it's generally not particularly draining. I always felt more refreshed and able to do things after 11 hours driving a truck than I did 8 hours sitting at a desk when I worked as a design engineer. That job ed me, as did my recent attempt at going into engineering project management. There's trucking jobs that keep things interesting. I got my ADR tickets for transporting hazardous goods, introduces a lot more complexity into the job to transport things safely. There's equipment and low-loader transport, which is a profession in and of itself. It's not all just driving pallets hub to hub. I'd recommend it for anyone who's in their early 20s and don't know WF they want to do with their life. I ultimately got out of it due to employers, was sick of being treated like scum by transportation companies, also discovered I had a health issue that could cost me my license. I know quite a few young people going into that because of the good pay. I worked a laser cutter cutting pipe for like a year. I'm not sure if that's what the official name is. That's just what we called it at that shop. But every day after work, I'd have this constant bright dot in the middle of my vision. Also, the shot blaster shooting metal BBS sand blasting pipes, basically. After 2 weeks of doing that, one of the guys came up to me and said the last 3 guys to work that ended up with lung cancer. It would spew all this black smoke out the top. I was about 23 and bailed out of there not long after hearing that. I landed in the ER once, and while waiting for the doctor to see me, I had to listen to the gentleman on the other side of the curtain be informed by his doctor that his vision loss was not temporary and he would be going completely blind. Turns out it was exposure from the light while working as a welder. He was an older gent, so I would hope it was from when safety goggles weren't as good and not because he didn't use them. My heart broke for him when he cried. Been a welder or fabricator for 14 years now. Moved job at the end of last year and they supplied 2,000-pound speed glass air-fed masks as standard. You have to sign paperwork weekly to say you've been maintaining it to keep it all in good condition. This is the first place I've worked in that have procedures like this in place to protect you from fumes. My last place kept saying they would invest in proper extraction but never ever did it. How they managed to keep auditors happy, I'll never know. As someone who works in construction, I've long said that there are very few countries in the world where I would be happy to ply my trade knowing I'd be fine in the long term. As far as pay, conditions, and O's, Australia is a world leader in this regard. And even so, there's still operators I'd refuse to work for. I'd probably consider working in North and Western Europe, possibly Canada. But from what I've seen elsewhere in the world where life is cheap, profit rules, and O's breaches are given a slap on the wrist if anything at all. I'm not doing this work where that mentality rules. I'm not a second-class citizen just because I wear a blue collar to work. We have strong unions to thank for the lifestyle we live, and still every day there are those who seek to erode that for their own personal gain. There's still many Australians who are anti-union, and I can't for the life of me understand why when you really look at the bigger picture. I'm an electrician by trade. Was at it for 8 years before I decided to start trying to change careers. Been almost 4 years now away from the trade full-time, only doing some work on the side when I feel like it for friends of friends. It's unreal how much better I felt overall after only a few months away. All my various aches and pains I had developed suddenly gone. I feel better physically now than I did in my early mid-20s. Only real lifestyle change being I don't do electrical work anymore. I guess it's unsurprising that crawling through attics and crawl spaces and often having no choice but to work in awkward, uncomfortable positions several times a day, week will do a number on someone over time. A couple years before I gave it up, my physiotherapist told me he views most construction work as simply trading one's physical health for money. He was very right. Farmers, I'm a farmer on a very small organic farm that is extremely safety conscious. We do our best. But it's still scary to constantly be around heavy machinery and do necessary upkeep and construction work while keeping insane hours. You know what's really ed up though? Farms are some of the only employers in the USA who don't have to provide workman's comp, even though farming is one of the top 20 most dangerous professions. The child labor laws are also absurdly lax. Gotta keep the country fed. Unfortunately, I knew a couple whose both families had been in farming for generations. She begged him to get out and told me why in hushed tones even though we were alone in her house. It's the chemicals. We know too many farm families who've had cancer, but no one will talk about it because it's their livelihoods. And she had tears in her eyes. Fast forward a few years and a farmer I knew had a 29-year-old daughter die very quickly from stomach cancer. I just knew it was from something on their farm. I'm not a doctor, but I believe some people are more susceptible to these chemicals. Totally unnecessary to farm like that. Farming is going through a lot of changes. Due to your exact worry, a lot of us are going back to old methods, which are more intensive physically, but much safer chemically and environmentally. I'm a farmer and I'd never give it up now that I see what I'm able to do with it. Connected to my community, I'm helping nature, and I'm making a living. Farming is essential for life, but the standard modernization of it is in us, and it needs to change or it will absolutely us all. African cobalt miner. There are in fact many fully legitimate and professionally operated mines throughout Africa. For sure there are also lots of dangerous artisanal mining operations. Don't let the memes convince you that represents 100% of the supply chain. Major operations understand the importance of mechanization and automation because it's actually more profitable and easier to scale when done right. I worked the night shift at a toy store and unloaded trucks and moved boxes. It was hard work and it ruined my back and feet. I think most non-office jobs will do that, so you're physically damaged over time. I have chronic back problems from all the standing on my feet all day long and moving heavy stuff. Thankfully, I have an office job now, and hopefully I will never have to go back to needing to stand on my feet all day, though I probably shouldn't worry about that, as I don't think I could anyway. Those hours are unbelievable. I don't know, I worked my fair share of 12Es and 24Es. But for the majority of my time as an EMT, I worked an 8-hour shift with 5 set days per week, no rotating. The catch was we were a power unit that responded to 2 different busy towns within our agency's jurisdiction, so for the most part we're pretty busy. But 8 hours flew by and didn't my entire day. I'm a firefighter paramedic. It isn't necessarily the hours, but yes, there are a lot of things that make this job why. I could go on for hours about it, but in summary, the pay, the physical and verbal abuse from patients, the horrible stuff we see, the lack of sleep, and complete annihilation of our circadian rhythm, the lack of support from city or town officials, the keyboard warriors that watch videos and try to tell us how to do our jobs, the higher risk of cancer from exposure to nasty stuff in fires, and the people who call 911 for stupid that we can't say no to. My father works 10 days, 4 off every 2 weeks, just so we break even. 13 minus 4-hour shifts each of those 10 days. He has seen every bad ending, every last mistake, and every wrongdoing in this region. Things I won't repeat here, for pay and not a lot of respect. You see all these flags and stuff about cops' lives, and I agree the cops that do try deserve recognition. But my father transported a prisoner with COVID on a ferry in the middle of a hurricane. No hazard pay at all. EMTs don't get enough credit. Healthcare workers, chronic lack of sleep due to understaffing, potentially combative patients, various communicable diseases, sometimes threats from patients, their families. I am a charge nurse at one of the busiest ERs in Texas, plus it is a county hospital. I get threats daily, told to go myself daily. I am exhausted to the point of tears after most shifts. I love my hospital and 99% of our patients are wonderful people, but it is getting to be too much. Healthcare workers are at their breaking point. I am so tired of politicians and hospitals saying there is a shortage of nurses. No, there isn't. There is a shortage of nurses willing to deal with low page and non-stop bull. I work in aged care and pathology collection. And yep, I never sleep enough because I work long days and my brain constantly ticks over at night. Did I get that agreement to pay form? What about that recollect? Did I do store's order? Where am I tomorrow? Is there enough XYZ? We also have aggressive patients. I've been smacked a few times, which was fine. It's the verbal abuse that gets me. Some dude came into today demanding a urine test. Okay, cool. There's hundreds of them. Have you got a form? Dude starts kicking off and shouting because his employer didn't know he needed a form to get a drug screen, and he decided that screaming at 2 women who were half his size was going to work. It didn't. The communicable diseases is real too. I got COVID from work, and there's always the threat of a needle stick injury. Good thing I know I've had my vaccines, and I'm tested for HIV and Hep C every 6 months anyway. Resident physician here. We often are working 80+ hours a week. Starting salaries are about $60,000 a year, which comes out to about 14-hour. Many salaries are tied to call, but some programs don't abide by it, leaving some residents to live off of $60,000 in places like California. You get yearly raises as your level progresses, but it's like an extra $1,000 added per year. Couple this with having to pay back student loans, pulling 24-hour shifts, doing home call, so getting woken up all hours to put in orders remotely, fix problems over the phone, or having to go in and fix bedside emergencies, and people get really unhealthy really quickly. Oh, to get a position you have to basically pay a ton of money to send applications to programs and interview there, which you have to do on your dime, and can mean lots of travel expenses. On top of that, you rank where you want to go and a computer calculates it with everyone else, so you may not match into the program down the street. Instead, you may have to live across the country within 2 or 3 months. So moving expenses and etc. can also cause massive costs to both students matching to residency and to residents matching to fellowship. If you don't match, you may have to find an open position in something you don't want to do. Want to go into surgery, but didn't match. Now you have to compete with the other thousands for the remaining open spots in other specialties. Some people don't match at all, meaning they have to find a job because as soon as you graduate the debt payments have to start, and we are talking payments on about $250,000 worth of loans. The sad part is that residents and fellows fall into a labor regulation crevice where labor laws don't fully apply, so we don't have things like protected lunches, and in order to promote better wellness, most programs assign modules that are mandatory to do in your free time. Other than is that most residents work in more than one hospital, so imagine having to learn the swing of things or a new computer system, also having to get credentialed, which usually means more computer modules, and on top of this we usually have yearly exams to gauge our performance, so most are constantly filling their free time with studying as well. Many programs also don't include parking or meals, so that another few hundred per month out of pocket, and even when there is food bought, it's usually junk food and eaten while doing patient charts or answering pages. They have physician lounges with free food, but many residents and fellows are barred from going in there. I know a few friends that had to go in front of administrators to explain why they were caught grabbing food from there when they weren't permitted. These are at non-profits that pull in a lot of money too. We can moonlight as well for extra pay, but even then, it's a crapshoot because some programs don't allow moonlighting, and when they do allow it, you have to carve out time to work, and it all has to not violate duty hours, which is funny since people just have to lie about their hours so they don't get in trouble. Also, if your program gets in trouble, say for hour violations, the repercussions can be the program gets shut down, leading to a bunch of people now having to fill spots in other parts of the country. It's tie, but we all try to make the best of it. Please be gentle on us if you see us in the hospital. Bouncer, security. In my younger days, I spent time as a bouncer, bar back, and concert security. Nothing like having a drunken take swings at you for trying to do your job, or getting blindsided by a beer bottle to the head, etc. 100% not a long-term sustainable role. I remember working in a strip mall next to a bar. Right near closing time, I watched a bouncer kick out a staggering drunk. Dude gets up and is yelling at the sky when a waitress come out to tell the bouncer something. The bouncer turns his head for about 2 seconds, and this drunk step out of his field of view, wins back and kicks the bouncer in the nuts so hard his heels came off the ground. I could hear hits from the follow-up pounding that the bouncer laid on that guy in the parking lot through the window glass to my store. You couldn't not pay me enough to do that job. I don't think there are many that aren't unhealthy. Well, the first step is being more reasonable when it comes to not signing up for ridiculously long work hours in the first place. A lot of what I'm reading in this thread has to do with hours that are just too long as opposed to the job itself actually being too dangerous. Working 10 hours a day 6 days a week is unhealthy, period, and really it's just greedy. Money is great, but at what cost? I'd rather have less money and a life worth living than more money and life I hate. If you're a trucker, driver, it's a choice to do 70+ hour shifts. You don't have to do it. Maybe no bartenders are awake yet, but bartending, it's incredibly draining and the late hours leave you exhausted all of the time. Dishwashing is far worse, the longest hours first and last, the lowest pay, absolutely back crushing, lot of stress if the kitchen is busy. You gotta be fast, but made a mistake? You pay for it. Zero respect, exposure to a lot of stuff including chemicals and water on your hands for hours and hours on WIAC you cannot sit on, sometimes not even have time to eat something. You can easily cut yourself off, burn yourself if the kitchen's small. You often have to help the cooks. Kitchens are always understaffed. Lift heavy weights, buckets of water, food, trash bags, be in contact with nasty pathogens when you have to clean the bathrooms, not that uncommon either. My longest shift as a dishwasher was 13.5 hours, and when they called again, I have to contain myself not to tell them to screw themselves up. I'm an attorney, and I have been in private practice for a little over 2 years. This profession chews people up and spits them out. The pressures of the job can be really crushing. People generally hate working with lawyers, and it always feels like you are walking on a knife's edge. One up could ruin your career by getting you fired, disciplined by the ethics board, sued for malpractice, or any combination of the three. Add on that many areas of private practice have high billable and receipt requirements that make for a horrible work-life balance, and you get a recipe for anxiety and depression. There is an epidemic of substance abuse and mental illness amongst attorneys, and the old guard still mostly refuses to recognize or address the problem.